Wendy.
Hey everybody, welcome today to Coffee Talk Moms, and we are so excited, so excited. Today we have Dr. Ericka Goodwin joining us today and having a conversation about, or how to have that conversation with your kids about race. That's the big discussion now, and Amanda and I really want to learn what healthy ways to have that conversation and effective ways to have that conversation with our kids. So thank you, Dr. Goodwin, so much for joining us today. All the way from Atlanta too, by the way.
Thank you.
So Dr. Goodwin, why don't you share with our viewers who you are, your background, and all that good stuff?
Sure. My name is Dr. Ericka Goodwin. I am a Harvard-trained, double board-certified psychiatrist. So I'm board-certified in child and adolescent psychiatry, along with adult psychiatry. I'm also an integrative lifestyle coach and a best-selling author. And it's my mission to help women feel seen, valued, and whole on their own terms. But today I'm here as a psychiatrist that no matter what your gender is, I just want to help people be able to get through all of the insanity that seems to be going around us with our sanity actually intact. And I'm a traveling psychiatrist, but I also have my own adult telepsychiatry practice. So I'm just so happy and honored to be here today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. And we're so glad that we're able to do this virtually across the U.S., different states. So thanks again. And we'll get right to it. So with, the light that's been shed on all of the recent events, Wendy and I have been, just having a dialogue on how to talk about race with your kids. And we wanted to get your perspective on how to have that conversation and at what age do you recommend?
Well, the interesting thing is this conversation has probably changed slightly just due to what the current social climate is, because if we would have had this conversation a few months ago, it would probably be slightly different because a lot of the conversation of even what's prompting people to have these conversations with race with their children, especially even younger children, is the exposure that's going on to the current social context with the massive dehumanization of Black people that is now very widely televised and being discussed, along with the wide emotional responses that people are having to it that extend in and significantly beyond the Black community. So for a lot of people, it's coming these prompts to have these conversations even earlier because the children are either being exposed in somehow to what's going on in the news, people are going to protest, people are having conversations about what's going on. So there's not really a true exact age. Part of it is, naturally you're not going to have these conversations with a 2-year-old.
Right.
But young children that are 3, 4, or 5 oftentimes do experience some level of awareness of race, even if that's not the language they use, even pre Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and George Floyd, is that there's some awareness just because kids will notice someone's different, or depending on the child, they may say something about another child, so the children may have questions about that. So probably what I would say is it has to be age appropriate. So naturally the conversation you'd have with a 3, 4, or 5-year-old is a little bit different than what you would have with a tween, which is different than what you'd have with a teen. But you can start having conversations around race and thus racism, even at younger ages, because kids will start having questions about either why they look different or why someone else looks different or someone's hair is different than mine. Or, sometimes kids can be a little brutal. Brutally honest, or they're absorbing in values or behaviors they've seen. So it's not unusual to have a child of color mention something about some child didn't want to play with them or called them a name. Or I have a good friend who their daughter, who was like 6 or 7 years old, was on the playground, and a little boy that was Caucasian told her that the slide was only for whites. Oh. So a lot of times when you start having these conversations, even with younger kids, they'll have experiences. They just may not have the same lens to process it. Right. But it's okay to start having conversations about race. And that's why there are a lot of books when kids are younger, but that also when you start having the conversations before a kid is like a teenager or even 12, then you're able to start a culture where children are able to accept, appreciate, and actually value and celebrate each other's differences versus looking at differences as being bad, be it if they're the one that's different or if someone else is different. So the good thing about starting conversations early is it helps you're shaping a child's values, because a lot of times kids are picking up on what adults do or say. So if as adults we have a lot of biases, there's a good chance your kids will too. But also they're learning how to deal with things socially, what social norms are, how to interact with other people, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. So by having these conversations, you're setting up your child to actually be more aware of their own behavior and to be accepting and loving to others, rather than you're trying to course correct when they're a teenager and they've already picked up all kinds of beliefs just because they weren't guided at all.
Oh, wow.
That's great. I can tell you what I've done. So I have a 4-year-old son and a 7-year-old son. And a few years ago, I bought several different books. I wanted to make sure that they understood and celebrated diversity. I grew up in Los Angeles, a very diverse city, and I wanted to just make sure that the same principles were instilled. So for the younger one, the books are a little bit more general. They're kind of like, these are the different colors you may see of all of our friends, and it goes through the range. Then there's some more like scientific technical books, like, well, the reason that some shades are lighter, your shades are darker, or melanin. And then for my older son, because he's a little bit older, I have books that are more specific, like a book called The Youngest Marcher. It's about a young civil rights activist, and he can understand that because of what he's seen going on here in Houston and around the world. So I don't know if you think that's a good start, but that's just kind of something that I had picked up from my childhood and kind of what I thought would get the dialogue going with my kids.
Well, I think that's an excellent start. There are a lot of books, and the other thing is at times it gets to a place where it's almost like Black things are only for Black people. So books with Black characters, Black dolls are only for Black people. So I think one of the things that also helps shift that narrative, especially when you have people that are non-Black or that are trying to raise their children in a way that they are able to be more inclusive instead of exclusive, is having exposure in multiple media forms or multiple experiences of people that don't always look like them, aren't exactly the exact same background. So I think that's definitely an excellent start.
And Dr. Goodwin, I want to add too, my daughter goes to a school which I love the school, but it doesn't have a lot of diversity. There's some diversity, but not a lot. So what are ways that you would advise or give me some tips to give her, being in a school where there's not a lot of people that look like her, where she doesn't feel like she has to change who she is, but be proud of who she is and still be able to engage in and be interactive with her peers, even though they don't look like her?
Well, the first thing is naturally, no matter what environment your child is in, you're naturally going to be teaching them social skills. So you want them to be able to socialize and be able to interact with anybody. It's a great, not only a survival tool, but it's also a great tool to be successful with life. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is that it's one of those things that it's a blessing and a curse out of COVID. Is that there are so many ways to connect with people that aren't even in your immediate vicinity. So this is a great time where you can start finding some virtual activities where if she doesn't have a chance to interact with as many people in color, that she can have some, not just traditional extracurriculars, but ways to have play dates or hang out with other kids that have similar interests, because they're doing all kinds of stuff online. It's amazing what's online right now. It's just totally amazing how much free content is out there. Also having exposure to positive images of color, so that she understands that not only do I see this successful teacher or this principal or these people's parents that are doctors, lawyers, or whatever they are, and they don't necessarily look like me, that she also gets to see people that look like her that are successful, so that she understands that level of either not just success, but actually happiness, and not feeling like your entire life is a struggle isn't dependent on how you look. So for some people end up in this place where they don't see anyone that looks like them, so they start assuming that means that's not what we do. And naturally, everyone isn't going to necessarily be in a community that is all homogenous. And especially we're having these conversations, is just as it enriches our environment to be able to have exposure to each other, it also enriches everyone else's environment for all of us to interact. So I think number one, the thought of being concerned and making sure that she still has other images is important. But, it's still okay for her to engage there, but being able to have open dialogue and conversations about what her experiences are, so that it's a situation where instead of waiting for her to come to you, you can be like, how was your day? How are the children? How are you getting along? How are your friends? Do you have friends? And get an idea of all that stuff instead of hearing about it when it's hit like a critical level, because I think that's the biggest thing, is making sure she feels socially connected and that it's still a safe space, even if the people are a little bit different.
That's good. Thank you. That's really good.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Thank you.
So, Wendy, do you have any further questions?
No, that was helpful.
Anything else that you want to add, Dr. Goodwin?
I guess the thing I would add is just a little bit of framework. So one of the reasons I'm so glad that the two of you decided to start having these conversations and enlarging the broader conversation around this is because there are so many things that are established in childhood. So number one, you all took the step to have probably one of the most important jobs in the world, which is to be a parent.
Yeah.
Because to be responsible not only for this life, but making sure that this life that you created becomes a positive person, that takes work.
Yeah.
It's hard work. People don't usually act, some people overcome the odds, but a lot of people are good people because there were good people behind them and that they had parents that really put forth an effort. So part of the reasons it's important to put forth this effort, have these conversations and be proactive is there something, have you all seem extremely well informed, heard of ACEs or adverse childhood experiences? So there's this pardon me?
Oh, no, go ahead.
So there's this language, and I won't say when I actually trained, I'm older than I look, but they came up with this kind of common language and they called it ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. They came up initially with 3 different categories with the idea that if you had these types of events, that there's a higher risk for you to have negative outcomes in adulthood, such as early death, cognitive or issues with how you think, difficulties or impairments in your brain development, emotional disturbances, increased high-risk health behavior. And part of the reason it's important to have these kind of conversations early is the original ACEs, they had 3 categories. One was abuse, one was neglect, one was household stressors. Household stressors is like a divorce or separated parent, mental illness in the household, someone incarcerated, those types of things. And then they started looking and adding in other things and looking at things such as racism. And the reason to have these conversations early is you want to avoid these long-term consequences in adulthood. When you can have these conversations and you're really impacting not only how the children see the world as far as it being a safe place for them, you're also impacting the value systems that your children are taking out into the community so that they're not negatively impacting someone else or being negatively impacted, which increases the possibility of them having a healthy and good adulthood. And I think that's all we want is for our children to be able to have a long, prosperous, healthy life where they're able to pass on another legacy that's greater than the one we gave them.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely, yes. That's beautifully said. I mean, I think that it really is all we want. I love that. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dr. Goodwin, you talked about, the impacts, the long-term goal of that. What recommendation would you give on how to have those conversations and what could we use to have those conversations with to help moms that are listening today?
I'll have to send you later out. There are some children's books that can be helpful, but one of the first things is there's a couple of just really basic things to remember. One is there is such a thing as too much information. So a lot of times if you have really younger kids, the first issue is you want to make sure that the conversation you're having and the words you're using are appropriate for the age of the child. So naturally, if you have a 3, 4, 5-year-old, you're not going to have a whole conversation around systemic racism. That's just not what's going to happen. So you want to make sure you use words that are appropriate. At this point, especially since so much is going on, that they may even come to you with questions. And you want to answer the question, but you don't want to elaborate so much that you cause more confusion. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like that old acronym KISS, but I hate the last S. I've got to find something else, so keep it simple. We'll just keep it simple. But it's the key is in the simplicity of it, that when you have really little kids, it's something as simple as people sometimes look different, but they're all good people.
Okay.
And, a lot of them, by the time they have language, they'll have gone to daycare or they've had play dates or they go to the park, and you can use examples from what they actually see.
Right. But
part of it is you are confirming and affirming them on that they're special and they are loved, but also saying that everyone, just because you're loved doesn't mean that everyone else isn't great too.
Mhm.
And so part of it is building them up and holding everyone together at the same place. And, I think when you're having those conversations, especially with children that may look a little different than who's in their community, is that a lot of it is surrounding these conversations with a lot of love and some quality time, so that they have a good sense that even if the world seems a little rough or prickly, that you're still very present, you're there for them, and they're very loved. And as they get a little bit older, then these conversations may be a little bit more complex, because they're also going to have their own experiences. So they may start talking to you about what they've experienced at school, or what they've seen, or if they've seen different movies. Like, I don't know if you all saw like The Hate You Give.
No.
And well, it's a great movie. It has, I think it's Amanda Seyfried, the young lady that played Rue on Hunger Games. I love
Right.
her. And it's a movie about her. In that particular movie, her best friend gets killed by a cop who stopped them randomly, and the young man was going for a brush in his pocket, and the guy shot and killed him. And it just kind of goes through kind of dealing with protests and things like that. It's actually interesting enough. I guess it's pretty relevant right now. But some of it is just being willing to have the conversation, because, I think the great thing that you all are doing is, if we don't have these conversations with our own youth in our community, someone else is going to have the conversation for you, and you don't know what they're going to say,
Right.
or what your child or the child that you care about is going to see, and how they're going to process that information, especially because this is a continual topic right now. There's really almost no way to hide from it in our current climate. And then also dealing with the fact that a lot of these kids may have a voice and may want to say something, as far as they want to help people feel better.
Yeah.
And being open to those conversations. So for some of the children, them being able to express themselves through art. Some are even doing sidewalk art with the chalk, and on their driveways, doing everything from Black Lives Matter to love everybody.
Yeah.
But it's just being able to be there to support their processing, because it's not always being out in the middle of a protest, but a lot of them may have strong feelings and want to not only be able to talk about them, but express the fact that they feel like there's injustice and they want change. And I think that's the difference in the conversation versus had you had this conversation 1 or 2 years ago. It might be talking about racism, but now it's shifting to a conversation not just of racism, but of activism.
That's a good point.
So Dr. Goodwin, not choosing not to have this conversation with your kids about racism, right? And, not being informed about the difference of people. And when you're not informed and you get educated by someone else, or you take it upon yourself and teach and believe that you've learned, taught yourself how to deal with racism, right? And then when you start to engage with someone that doesn't look like you, what are the impacts, or could be the impacts, of the self-esteem issues of the other person, of engaging, with different races? I don't even know if I said that right.
I think I got the point.
Okay.
You let me know if I don't answer right.
Okay.
So the meat of that is by not having these conversations, if you have a child that's from the predominant culture, is that if you don't have these conversations, you may end up raising and having this child that has an extreme amount of bias that may not even be your bias, or they may come up with yours. But I assume you at least have some type of self-awareness to your own biases if you're watching this, because you wouldn't have turned this on if you just don't care. But you want these children to know what they're dealing with, because you don't want a child so we'll just put it real simple. So if you have this white child that you never talk to them about anything, and they're like, well, I don't see color. And they're like, I got my one black friend, because depending on their neighborhood, there may just be one black kid that is their friend, is that then they're not emotionally prepared, number one, to understand other people's differences. So when bias starts coming out in their own lives, or their own bias, because they're kind of absorbing their environment, they're not going to have anything to counteract it. So they may end up basically facilitating this behavior that, especially if you're watching this may not be the value system that you want your child to take into the world, especially as they get older and are adults. And we all know, they always say sticks and stones may hurt my bones, words will never hurt me. But we actually know for real that for a lot of people, words really do hurt. Yeah. And the behaviors that people have that have significant bias or are straight up racist can be just words, or, this is a situation where people become adults and they can discriminate against people, keep people from getting jobs, keep people from having resources. If they're in a place to put in policies in place, they can put in policies that are totally discriminatory. So by having these conversations and dealing with it as a child, then hopefully then this child grows up to be someone that has less bias. I think the expectation that people have no bias is probably unrealistic, but less bias, because the flip side is, if you don't have this under control, is it's going to significantly impact the way you treat people, which, as you were talking about, self-esteem can significantly not only impact someone's self-esteem, but it can also impact what their life is. So if someone is feeling oppressed, or they're constantly told that they're ugly, or told that they're not smart, because that's the other issue that happens, is not only people's peers, but their teachers and counselors that have frequently told Black and Hispanic kids that they weren't smart, or that, you know, they don't really need to look for anything other than a trade, or being a janitor or a bus driver. Is that as people get in areas of influence, it's hard to lift people up if you don't have a belief system that helps you believe in the capacity of other people. So it can hurt, because naturally no one wants to be put down, called a name, or discriminated against. It hurts people's feelings. And when you have younger people and they have identity formation, is that then they're integrating into their identity that their self-worth is low. And it's a lot harder to fix that later, because most likely the time that this would get intervened on again would be as an adult. It's a lot harder to fix that kind of self-concept as an adult than it is to kind of nip all this in the bud when a child is young. So being of the family of like a person of color, part of what families try to do is you're trying to lift someone up to give them enough of a protection barrier against everything that society is bringing at them. But I love this conversation because it gives you a two-pronged approach, that not only are you trying to help your children have a shield, but you're also teaching the other children how not to come at them so they don't need the shield to begin with.
I love that.
Yeah.
That gave me goosebumps.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Do you any other points, Wendy or Dr.
No,
Goodwin?
this was good. This was really good.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for being on the show. And we'll link your website and all of your social media below. And thank you everyone for watching Coffee Talk Moms. You can go to our channel and subscribe, go to our website, comment, let us know what else you'd like us to discuss. And thanks so much. Bye for now.
Bye for now. This was good.